to everybody for joining us today. I think we've got quite a large audience today, so hopefully we'll get some good questions as well throughout this. So today I'm going to talk about an assessment that is new to the Pearson portfolio, new to Q Global, which is the PEDICAT, or the Pediatric Evaluation of Disability Inventory Computer Adaptive Test. So let's get to it and work our way through these. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the PEDICAT and what it is. And for some of you on here today, some may be familiar with the PEDICAT, some it is a completely new assessment. So I'll give us a sort of an overview of the whole assessment and what it does and how it works on Q Global. Then I'm going to hand it over to Chris, my partner and presenter here today, who is going to talk about Q Global. And he will give an overview of Q Global, and Chris will hand it back to me to talk about availability and pricing, and I'll talk through the conversion for those who are using the current version on the desktop or the iPad, and we'll talk through sort of conversion over to Q Global as well. So on that note, let's go through and give you an overview of PEDICAT. So what is PEDICAT? Well, it's an assessment that's been around for some time as a desktop application or as a iPad version, and we've made it available on Q Global. And it was made available. It's published only in the last couple of weeks in this month, actually in April 2020. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. It was actually released, and it's a caregiver report. So basically, it's a series of questions that a caregiver responds to, and they can respond to it on Q Global, either remotely or in person on Q Global. And I'll talk a little bit more about the administration options as we go through this presentation. It has very diverse coverage. It's an assessment that goes from birth to 20 years, 11 months. And it can be used with many different clinical groups. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this presentation. But it certainly is very diverse in its application. And it provides coverage of basically mobility, daily activities, social cognitive, and responsibility. And again, I'll give you a little bit more of an explanation of those as we go through. It's a computer adaptive test, as the name of the product sort of suggests, and that means it's basically an assessment that tailors to the responses of the caregiver. So again, we'll go a little bit more into detail on that as we go through this session today. And it provides automated scoring and report generation. So when you administer the assessment, scoring and reporting is generated immediately upon completion of the assessment. There is no special environment or equipment required. So as it's a questionnaire-based tool, you don't need special manipulatives and items to administer the assessment, and you don't need any special environmental considerations. And I guess that also means it's applicable for telehealth and telepractice scenarios where you need an assessment that you can send to a caregiver to complete in their own environment, and it comes back to you ready, scored, and completed and things. There's no training required. Obviously, we sell assessments depending on clinical qualifications, and it is graded according to our different qualification levels. So you do have to be a professional to be able to purchase it, but then there's no specific training required to actually administer the assessment. And the manual is included in the assessment. So when you buy usages on Q Global, the manual is there and it's included for free. And as I talk about the pricing at the end, that will sort of become apparent as well. It is an assessment that has many, many translations, and it's used worldwide. And if I just sort of bring these two buttons up here, you'll see it's available in English US, Spanish US, French Canadian will be available in the next couple of weeks. English Commonwealth we've used that term because that covers those countries such as Australia, the UK, Canada, where there are some language differences between US English and sort of the English used across those Commonwealth countries. There's Dutch, there's German, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Italian, and Brazilian Portuguese. Now, as of the release of April this month, the initial release was for English US, Spanish US, and English Commonwealth. And we'll be releasing other language versions over the next couple of months. So the next one will be French Canadian, then Dutch, and working through. It's not in the order you're seeing on screen here, and I can't remember the exact order, but they'll all come through through May and June, possibly into July of this year as we start to release those. So if you are listening from one of those countries, then it isn't quite available yet, but will be in due course. So, as I've said, it is a very diverse assessment, and this image on the screen is one that I've chosen specifically because I think it captures the diverse application of the PEDICAT. It is an assessment that covers needs such as mobility needs, whether children are using wheelchairs or they're using assistive devices, to social, emotional, cognitive, and communication needs. So it has got a very, very diverse coverage. And as I go on to the next slide, that will become a little bit more apparent. So, sorry, there we go. So in terms of versions, so there are two main versions of the PEDICAT. One is a content balanced, and the other one is called the PEDICAT, and that is my favorite name of an assessment that I've ever come across. And basically the difference between these two is that the content balanced, think of it like a full assessment, the fuller version of the assessment. And the PEDICAT is a briefer version of the assessment. And there's basically an item bank of items in it, and with the content balanced version, you're going to get asked about approximately 30 questions per domain, and whereas with the PEDICAT version, you'll get asked about 10 to 15 questions per domain. So it's going to be about half or slightly less than half the number of items, and I'll talk about the domains in a second. Then there's another version called the ASD scale, or the Autism Spectrum Disorder scale. And this is a scale that's been modified to meet the needs of those on the Autism Spectrum Disorder. So with that, it's basically a module that has been validated for the population of children and adolescents on the Autism Spectrum Disorder. And it includes additional directions to help caregivers select appropriate ratings. And those directions are unique to the characteristics of children and youth with autism. And it also includes a few additional items or revised items in certain domains, those domains being daily activities, social, cognitive, and responsibility. There's also some additional scaling within the ASD scale. And again, that reflects the unique patterns of this population. And for those of you who've used the PEDICAT before and are familiar with the PEDICAT, you may not have used the autism scale. It's a new scale. It was released in 2019, and so not everybody has used it or is familiar with it, but it has been made available, and it is available on Q Global. So in terms of the domains of the assessment, you've heard me mention these a few times already. So there's the daily activities domain, and this consists of 68 items in areas such as dressing, maintaining hygiene, home tasks, eating and mealtime. In the mobility section, there are 75 items, and they're in 4 content areas, which are basic movement and transfers, standing and walking, steps and inclines, and running and playing. But also, there are an additional 10 items specifically for children who use mobility devices such as walking aids, like canes or crutches and walkers. And there's a wheelchair subdomain, which has an additional 12 items for those who are using wheelchairs. In the social cognitive domain, there are 60 items in 4 areas, which are interaction, communication, everyday cognition, and self-management. And then the responsibility domain. Now, this is a unique domain to the PEDICAT, and I really like it's one of the things I really like about the PEDICAT. And it basically captures that information about a child that a lot of other assessments don't capture. So if you have a child or a young adult with complex needs, it's always useful to capture the amount of support or scaffolding that a caregiver provides around that individual. And that's what the responsibility scale really helps you do. It helps capture that scaffolding and support, you know, what level of responsibility is that young person taking for perhaps independent living or organising and planning or taking care of daily needs or managing their health, things like that. So it looks at how much responsibility they take for those and how much responsibility the caregiver takes. And it really helps understand that sort of dynamic in their everyday life. And I really like that part of the PEDICAT as well. So all these domains are available for the autism scale or the non-autism scale, and they're all available for the content balanced version or the PEDICAT, the briefer version. And you can choose when you do the assessment to do any combination of these, so you don't have to do all domains. So if mobility isn't something that's applicable for the group that you're working with, then you don't have to administer the mobility domain. And then, as you've heard me mention, it works like an item bank. So with the content balanced version of the test, you are going to get asked a maximum of about 30 items per domain. So in total, that's 120 items. But actually, there's an item bank of 276 items, or if you're using the autism scale, there's 300 items in the item bank. So you're never going to be asked every single question, every single item. It's going to be a subset of items dependent on the responses of the caregiver as they're completing the assessment. So I hope that sort of makes a little bit of sense on how it works and how those pieces fit together with the assessment. In terms of applications, PEDICAT is used across many different settings and many different applications. It's used for the identification of functional delay. That's quite a major use of it. It's used for progress monitoring, and one of the things that it has in it is in one of the scores, the scaled score is really useful for monitoring change over time, so it does help facilitate that. It's useful for reassessment, whether it's initial assessment, interim discharge planning, etc. And there's no minimum time which must pass between assessments, so you can administer it as frequently as you require. And it's also useful for goal setting. It uses a top-down approach, so it's really capturing all those aspects of daily life that you want to gather information on and helping you use that information for goal setting and supporting the individual and their family. So I want to give you a few content examples that will help sort of, I guess, clarify how the look and feel of the assessment and the sort of level or the sort of questions that a caregiver is going to be reporting on. So we'll run through these. These are some screenshots that I've taken from the actual assessment. So this is an example of a daily activity item. And this one, you'll see it's laid out with the daily activity and the mobility items. There's a very simple drawing or drawing alongside the questions just to help caregivers understand the task as well. So this one you'll see states pours liquid from a large carton into a glass. And then you've got a 5-point scale from I don't know through to easy, a little hard, hard, unable. And the nice thing here is you'll notice there's a response which is an I don't know response. Well, you can use that and it basically adjusts the assessment. So it basically accommodates for the fact that you are not going to be able to respond to every item. So if there's an I don't know response, then it will just replace it with another item. So the caregiver is still asked the optimum number of items when they're completing the assessment. This one, another daily activities item, rubs hands together to clean. I don't think there's anything else I really need to say about that one. It's pretty self-explanatory. This one is a slightly mature item, shaving face using an electric razor. And again, I've just put this in to show the breadth of the assessment and the information that it gathers. And then if we move on to mobility, this is a fairly, I guess, a more basic level of mobility, and it's looking at when lying on belly, pushes up to hands, so some of those early developmental skills with mobility. And again, it's a 5-point scale as to whether or not they find it easy or they're unable to do it, or perhaps you don't know as a caregiver. And then through to more complex advanced mobility tasks. So this one, walking fast enough to cross 2-lane streets safely. You'll notice here it says, please do not consider the use of walking aids, walkers, crutches, or canes. And that's because there are items that are specifically for those scenarios where you might use those devices. So this is just talking about using a mobility without those particular items. This one, climbing a ladder, climbs up a ladder of a slide. Again, I just wanted to show you an example of an item that perhaps complements some of our other assessment tools that are out there. So again, it's capturing a breadth of skills across different areas of development and different areas of mobility. And this is an example of an item using a walking aid. So this is walking with a walking aid from room to room, no stairs, just walking around the house, whether they're using a walker, crutches, or canes. So this is specific for those items. And when you, one thing I failed to mention earlier, when you actually set up the assessment, you are asked whether whether the child uses any of these devices. So then it adjusts the assessment to adapt for those that are using wheelchairs or not. So if if the child is not using a wheelchair or they're not using a walking aid, then they will not get asked these questions. So, but you get this at the setup of the assessment. You establish whether or not they're using any of these devices. And this is an example of a mobility item using a wheelchair, so going up and down curbs with a manual wheelchair. And again, it's the same 5-point scale. And this one, another more complex wheelchair item, looking at transferring from manual wheelchair into an adult-sized chair. And then an example of a social cognitive task. So this one, greets new people appropriately when introduced. Again, it's the same 5-point scale on here as to whether or not they can do that or can't do it, or perhaps you don't know. And another example, providing own address and telephone number when asked. Then the next item is the same item, provides own address and telephone number when asked. This is an example of how the item might be adapted to suit the needs of an individual on the autistic spectrum. So you'll notice here it says, when responding to these items, consider your child's performance using their primary mode of communication, which could be augmentative communication, sign language, picture exchange communication systems, etc. So it's accommodating the item to allow for some of those adjustments that that individual might have in their everyday communication strategies. And then, as I mentioned before, the responsibility scale is something that's very unique. It's about that level of responsibility that the individual takes. So this one, maintaining cleanliness and upkeep of living space. For this one, the scale is slightly changed. So we go from an adult or caregiver has full responsibility and the child does not take any responsibility, to the child taking full responsibility without any direction, supervision, or guidance. So again, it's a different scale because it's capturing a different level of information. And then this is another example, just maintaining cleanliness and upkeep of living space, and it gives you an example of the sort of things you can include in when you're considering that response. And then a final one on the responsibility. This is an example of an item for the ASD scale, and I like to bring this one up because it gives you, I guess it captures the nuances or the different needs of washing hands. So this one says, includes turning water on and off, getting soap, thoroughly scrubbing hands with soap, drying hands if your child uses hand sanitizer as an alternative to washing hands with soap and water, rate based on that behaviour. So it's acknowledging that, for some, that hand washing might be a different format, a different ritual or whatever, and that they may well use hand sanitizers rather than soap and water. So it's capturing that sort of different information. And then, as I've said before, this with Q Global and with PEDICAT, it can be administered on any internet-enabled device, and it can be administered remotely. So if you want to send it to a caregiver to complete, they can complete it on their smartphone. It can be completed on a tablet device, on a laptop or whatever, and Chris is going to talk a little bit more about the Q Global side of things. But this is just a screenshot actually taken from my smartphone, and I've just put it in here, but this is how it looks when a caregiver may respond to it on a smartphone. It's very clear, it's very simple to use to respond to the items and then just move through the assessment. So that gives you kind of a very brief overview. As I said, there's about 300 items in there if you include the ASD scale as well. So that's just a brief selection of items. In terms of psychometrics, just to sort of give you an overview of the psychometric background of the assessment, it was developed on a sample of 2,205 individuals across the United States. Previously, on the desktop version and the iPad version, there were 21 age groups. With the Q Global version, we've actually narrowed the age groups. There are now 59 age groups in it, so it gives you a more accurate response, or a more accurate T-score and more accurate percentile ranges for those younger groups especially. So we'll see from 0 to 11 months as 1 month intervals of normative data. From 1 to 1 year 11 months is 2 month intervals. From 2 to 5 years 11 months is 3 month intervals. 6 to 10 years 11 months, 4 month intervals, and then 11 to 20 years 11 months is 1 year age bands or intervals. So it grades the months or the years depending on the developmental stages of the individuals. It has got a very good clinical validation. 703 children with disabilities were involved in the clinical studies. And as I've said, it's computer adaptive, and I'm just going to go on to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So what is computer adaptive testing? Well, it's tailored testing. It basically tailors the assessment according to the responses of an individual. So if you start with an item that is, or you come across an item that is perhaps too challenging for that individual, the next item would be, it would send you a slightly easier item to respond to, and it will adjust the responses according to how you respond to an individual item. It's developed using something called IRT, or item response theory, which is one of them. It's a method used for developing a lot of assessments, but it's particularly useful for computer adaptive testing and tailoring items to generate scores using computer adaptive testing. It's computer-based testing, so as I've said, it adapts to the examinee's ability level, which I think I've already covered. And it does require large item pools. So as I've said, there's this item bank within the assessment, but you're never going to get more than 120 items out of the 300. And it requires that item pool to be able to get those responses, to tailor them to the individual's level or ability level. And the beauty of it is it creates a really brief assessment, but precise assessment. And that reduces the caregiver burden. They're not answering questions that are perhaps inappropriate for them, or they're unable to respond to. So it's briefer in the time required to administer it. And I think administration time averages for the full content balance version, it averages about 15 minutes. For the PEDICAT version, it's more like 5 to 10 minutes of administration time. So it is brief, but it is precise in what it's doing. So that's my sort of quick overview for now. I'm going to, one more thing to mention is that the reliabilities as well with computer adaptive testing and IRT-based computer adaptive testing, it does create equal and oftentimes higher reliabilities in the assessment. So the data you're generating, the information you're getting is highly reliable and highly accurate. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to pass you over to Chris, who's going to take you through Q Global. Are you there, Chris?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Shelley. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm going to talk about Q Global and generally about Q Global first, and then more specifically how the PEDICAT is used on Q Global. Okay, so what is Q Global? Q Global is Pearson's web-based platform for administration, scoring, and reporting. Is typically used with questionnaires, rating scales, and inventories. However, Q Global allows users to enter in raw scores for larger assessments, such as the WISC, or the WIPSI, or the CEL-5. Depending on the assessment, there are 3 different ways to administer. There's a manual entry that's done when you have a paper form, and then you can put the responses on the paper form in manually. There's on-screen administration, and then there's remote on-screen administration, and that is typically done through the system, where if you have a caregiver who is filling out the assessment, you can email them a link, a secured link that they will then take, and they can click on and then use or administer the assessment. Okay, for the PEDICAT, there is no manual entry. The only way the entry is done on the PEDICAT is through on-screen administration or remotely. Okay, some of the key points related to Q Global is that it provides, as a platform, unique user access. So users can access Q Global 24 hours, 7 days a week on any web-enabled device. So you can use your laptop, you can use your iPad, you can use your iPhone or your Android phone or whatever you're using to access the internet. All the reports are stored in one place, so that when you use Q Global for PEDICAT or other assessments, through your account you can access all the reports for those assessments for each of the children or clients that you're assessing in one place. So the dashboard will allow you to access all of the assessments that you have assigned and used. Okay, existing users will get access to the PEDICAT, and they'll get access to the manual through Q Global. Okay, in terms of data compliance, questions often asked is, how does Q Global protect personal data? Pearson security for data stored on Q Global complies with standards established in HIPAA. The following types of general safeguards protect your personal data. You have administrative safeguards, physical safeguards, and technical safeguards. In addition, your data is secured as follows. When you access the system, the web link from the Q Global side is password protected. It is also protected through a secure transmission. The data transferred or being transferred from your web browser to Q Global is sent over a secure internet connection. With your stored data, the stored data is protected utilizing encryption and physical security and administrative safeguards. Okay, also with Q Global, you only pay for what you use, and you only pay when you generate a report. So if an administration isn't completed, you're not being charged for that administration. You only are charged when you generate a report. And once you've generated a report for an administration, you can go back and regenerate that report if necessary. And again, the manual is available for free in the resource library on Q Global. Q Global also allows for the management of organizational accounts, and Q Global is very much a time-saving device because it includes all of the assessments in one place that you may be using. It also includes the information from all the clients that you may be seeing. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you some of the facets of Q Global. And when you log in, this is the page that you would see. It's going to have a list of your examinees, the subjects that you have already done assessments with. So once you're you can then also create new examinees. You can also delete current examinees, You can assign assessments. You can also create groups of examinees if you're doing ratings using a specific assessment of a classroom or a small group. You can also view and manage your account, access resources like the manuals from the resource library, and provide notifications and feedback. A key function of Q Global is that it provides a lot of help resources to assist in guiding you in using the platform. You can select the help button here, and that will then take you to the help section. And I don't know about you, I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't much technology, so I kind of feel like an immigrant in this technology world. So when I'm dealing with a platform, like Q Global, when I first started learning it, it was very helpful to have a very comprehensive help section. Okay, so if you look at this help section, you have resources like tip sheets, frequently asked questions, and videos that you can access with just getting started with Q Global, managing accounts within Q Global, managing your examinees within Q Global, managing the assessments that you want to use in Q Global that are available through Pearson, and then how to generate reports. There are also help resources for group administration, other tools within the system, how to set up preferences in your own account, and then how to reach support if you need even more help. All right, now going back to the dashboard, as I had already mentioned, there are a resource library that you can access the manual for the PEDICAT. So you would click on the resource library, and then it would have all of the different assessments that Pearson has on Q Global. Then you can click on PEDICAT on the tree for PEDICAT, and then if you're a customer who has purchased PEDICAT, then you'll be able to get into the restricted area and then click on the manual. All right. In this next slide, what I'll be talking about is assigning an assessment. So how do we assign the PEDICAT to an examinee? And what we do is that you're back on the examinee screen of the QG dashboard. You first would select the actual examinee that you wish to assess. And at this point, then you would click on Assign a New Assessment, and this is what would pop up. It would be a list of different assessments that are available. And the system allows you to use the My Favorites star to select those assessments that you often use. And when you click on that, it will list just those assessments. So in this case, the My Favorite star is selected for the Self-5, PEDICAT, and the Shaywitz dyslexia screener. And so then you could easily select the PEDICAT, and then you would click the Assign button to assign that assessment. Okay, once you click that Assign button, you will then be taken to the Create Administration screen. You can choose the person and, you can choose doing the screening in person, so on your computer, or you can choose to, again, use it remotely and send a secure email link to the person that you want to fill out the PEDICAT. You can also then cancel the request if you aren't going to move forward. But if you are going to move forward, then what you would click is on the Create Administration. All right. so the system allows you to then schedule the assessment, and in scheduling the assessment, you can set a time limit on how long the caregiver has to complete the assessment. You can re-enter the administration if you're doing the administration on your own screen with the caregiver. You can re-enter if the connection is dropped. Okay, in terms of system requirements, Q Global requires that you have internet access through a supported browser, IE 11 or above, Safari 9 or above, Edge, Chrome 38 or above, or Firefox 27 or above. It also needs operating systems, Windows 7, 8, 10, or Mac OS 9, 10.9 or above. Then also, in order to administer, you again need a Q Global account that's activated and has credits so that it can be administered. Okay, the remote questionnaires can be completed on any internet-enabled device. And if you are doing if you have a caregiver in your office to fill out on your own laptop, you can use the test screen lock, which will only allow them to use Q Global for that assessment. They cannot stray off of that assessment. All right. Once the assessment is assigned, you would see this screen. Once you select, in this case, we're selecting in-person online administration. Then you would then select that if you wanted to do the test session lock, then you would also identify the domains that you want to assess. So you do not have to assess all of the domains for a particular subject. Also on this screen, which we aren't showing because it's a large screen, you can also select the language of the administration, so what language you want to administer it in. You can select the person who's completing the assessment, the caregiver is the caregiver or parent. Is it the clinician who is filling out the form? You can also select if the subject has a walking device or a wheelchair, and then you can also select if the subject is diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder. Then once you have selected these options, then you would click on the Launch Assessment. Okay, once you click on the Launch Assessment, you would then go to the first screen, which would detail what you need to know in order to start the assessment. So when you click Begin, the system will sign you out of your Q Global account and open a new browser that provides access to the PEDICAT. The web browser must allow Q Global the ability to display the assessment in a pop-up window. So it provides you information on so that you can proceed using the PEDICAT. Then once you would then click Begin, and then you actually go to the domain, the first domain, which in this case is daily activities. Since you had selected the daily activities domain as one of the domains that you wanted to assess. And at that point, it will provide an overview of the items, of the responses to items in that section. So when you're filling it out, the scale is unable, hard, a little hard, easy, or I don't know. And it provides a description of that. once you move to use the arrows in, if I go back previously, so you use the arrow on the lower right, then to click into the first item, and then the item will pop up, and you'll read the item and select or endorse the what you feel is the correct response. And as you can see in the bottom, you can then go forward to the next item. Once you go back, do an item, you can always go back to that item using the arrows on the bottom. Okay, at the end of going through all the items, there's a button that says submit. You click on that submit button. It will submit it to the system. At that point, an email will be sent out. So if you're doing it remotely, an email will be sent to you that the caregiver has completed the assessment. Then that email will include a link so that you can go back into Q Global and you can then generate reports. So let's see. All right. So score reports may be viewed in Q Global platform as a PDF, and they're immediately after completion of the PEDICAT. Score reports can be printed, emailed, or exported. Data can be exported from Q Global in a CSV.file format. You can see assessments of multiple students at one time from your dashboard. And what you can then do is select on the student that you are, or student or child that you were evaluating. In this case, we would select on Gemma Jones. Once we select on Gemma Jones, on the next screen, we would then select the PEDICAT. If you had given other assessments to Gemma, they would also show up here. So if you had used the Shaywitz with Gemma as well, you would have that option at this point on the screen to either select the PEDICAT or the Shaywitz. At this point, we've just used the PEDICAT, so we'll select on the PEDICAT. Okay, once we select on the PEDICAT, then we can select what we want to include in the report. So we have report options. The Q Global PEDICAT reports include, for all the reports, they include the identification number or name of the child, their date of birth, gender, date of assessment, the domains administered. It also includes the scale score with a standard error and normative scores, fit scores. It also includes if a walking device or wheelchair is applicable, and then the type of PEDICAT which was administered, either the speedy or the content balanced. Reports can also be configured to include a list of all the items, the item maps, and it also can include the language used for the report. Okay, the types of scores that are provided are normative scores, like T-scores and percentiles, scaled scores, and in this case, the scaled scores are the normative scores are age-related. So they're based on the normative sample for the specific ages that were included in the normative sample. The scale scores are not age-related. They represent the child's current status among the continuum of functions represented in the domains. So it's a criterion referenced and not age-related and can be used out of age. Okay, the fit score provides information whether the responses to the questions were close to expected. So basically, the fit score is, Okay, the fit score is developed using item response theory. So the FIT score provides information about whether responses to questions were close to expected. The computer adaptive tests, which the PEDICAT is one, computes a standard, a log-like statistic based on the child's response to the items in relation to each of the other items and the items as they were endorsed by the standardized sample. In this process, we can identify if the fit of the items is as expected based on the normative sample. If the fit is large and in the negative direction, it's indicating that there are some uncommon responses, or the responses don't fit with what typically is seen in endorsing the items in the domain. Okay, then there's also item map, and this provides a convenient method of interpreting the PEDICAT scale scores with respect to the expected level of difficulty of activity items or the child's amount of responsibility when they respond to the responsibility domain. The item maps represent the location of item ratings along a continuum of difficulty that measure the domain. Okay. Then in the report, the first page of the report will provide you examinee information. And then a summary of scores. So in this case, we were looking at the daily activities domain and the social cognitive domains only. The scores included here are the T-scores and percentiles, the FIT score. So you can see on this, I know it's small, but you can see that the daily activity scale is not not a good fit, meaning it's not representative of the type of responses that were found in the normative sample. So any interpretation of the scale scores from this result should be done with caution. Okay, the results indicated that when compared to same age peers, the T-scores place the subject in the 78th percentile rank and the 76th percentile rank. The report also includes the specific items and how they were endorsed by domain. So for that first item, pulls open a sealed bag of snack food, the response was a little hard, so this information is put in the report. Okay. Okay, the item maps represent the location of item ratings along a continuum of difficulty measured in the specific domain. So in this case, we're looking at the social cognitive domain. The numbers in red are those items that were actually endorsed. Again, since this is a CAT measure, not all of the items are going to be included in the administration. So for this, for Gemma, we see the specific items under self-management that were included and what her scores were. The line and the gray area through the scores is the scale scores with the a confidence interval around them. So that's where we'd expect most of the other scores to fall as well. And at the bottom, you can see the scaled score access. Or axis, sorry. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Shelley, and she's going to talk about availability and pricing.
Wonderful, thank you, Chris. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this. We've had quite a lot of questions coming in, so we'll get some of those questions after this part. So there's only a couple more slides here, I think. So in terms of pricing, I've got pricing here for both the United States and for Canada, because that's most of the people on here will be either in the US or in Canada. So for the US, the price is $2 per administration or report. So that includes the actual administration of the assessment and the generation of the report as well. And as we said before, the manual is available in Q Global for free anyway, so you're simply paying for each usage. And we have tiered pricing available, so the more usages you are purchasing or using, then the cheaper the price is. Likewise with Canada, it's $2.40 Canadian dollars per administration and report. And again, this tiered pricing is slightly different, just because it's sort of a slightly different system in Canada. But they that's how the pricing works for Canada as well. So the more you're buying, the cheaper it actually is. As I said before, the manual is available free in Q Global Resource Library, and it will always be available for free in there. There's no expiration on usages, so once you purchase those, they're never going to expire. So, you know, if you purchase a large amount, they could last you 2 or 3 years. You could just purchase enough for a month at a time, whatever you want to do. It's entirely up to you and flexible in that respect. And a usage is only consumed on report generation. So you can actually administer the assessment as many times as you want, and you actually only charge for it when the report is generated. So if you happen to send a link out to a caregiver and that link is lost and that assessment is never completed, you haven't paid for it. And that's one of the beauties of it over a paper questionnaire where you know that protocol could get lost and you've had to pay for the protocol. This way, you are only charged when you actually generate the report. For international customers, as I've said, we'll be rolling it out to those other languages, those other countries, and it'll be available through our local Pearson offices. And we've got offices, you know, in Australia, throughout Europe, Canada, Brazil, etc. So, but I should say that for the Brazilian version, that will be available through our US office, and that's because they haven't got Q Global in Brazil, so it will be through our US office, and likewise with the Italian version, that will be through our UK office. For those who are users of PEDICAT already, you can continue to use your current license. So if you've paid for an annual license of the desktop version, absolutely continue to use that until that expires. For the iPad version, updates will be supported through to December 2021, and after that, updates will no longer be supported. They will stop supporting updates on the desktop version. We don't know the date for that yet. That's to be determined, but that will happen in due course. It is free to set up a Q Global account. So I know some people wish to continue to use their current license, but they would like a few of the Q Global reports to use remotely. So some are using a bit of both at the moment. So they bought a few Q Global reports to tide them over until their license expires. And yeah, I think I've covered that, using those both versions together. As I said, there's no training option, no specific training required, but we will be doing some more in-depth webinars through the year that talks about looking at the profiles and interpretation of scores and things like that. So we're looking at trying to schedule some sort of continuing education CE credit webinars that will kind of go more in depth over those things. So today is very much about just what is the Q Global version and how is it different from the desktop version. And in terms of support, obviously we have all our, we will be supporting people through this transition over, and we have all our support mechanisms in place to support customers and answer queries and things like that. So we'll be providing all that information. Now, we've had a ton of questions through this, and one other thing I should say is that it will be going on, for those of you who are in school systems, it will be going on the digital assessment, well, it is already available on the digital assessment library for schools. For those of you who do use the digital assessment library, PEDICAT has been added to that as well. So, and I think that's kind of it in terms of the overview here, but we've literally had about 115 questions that have been coming through, and we've been trying to answer some of them as we're going. Some of them we've kept here because they're good questions for everybody to listen to the responses to. So I'm going to just pick out a couple because we've only got 5 minutes, but maybe Chris, if you see any that you think you could chime in on as well. So, but there's a couple that have sprung to mind already because they've been asked by a few different people who've asked the same question. So one is about the report. So if you are administering the Spanish version, will you have the report generated in Spanish or English? You can actually have either option. You can have it generated in Spanish and English. And the other thing I didn't mention early on is when all the language versions are available, you can use any of those language versions. So when you go into the assessment, if you are in the US and you want to administer it to administer the German version, then you can select the German version for the caregiver to respond to. And you can generate the report in English or in the language that they responded in as well. So I knew that came up a few times. Go on, Chris.
Yes,
Yep.
Shelley, also on reports, that's come up a few times, is how many times can you generate a report on Q Global, and can you give the report to family, schools, doctors, etc. Once you configure a report, you can then generate that same report again and download the PDF, and you can share the PDF with those different groups of individuals.
Perfect, thanks, Chris. So other ones that have come up quite a lot, is this appropriate for a school setting? I mean, there are items, it is used in school districts quite a lot, and the fact that it's available on the Digital Assessment Library sort of is testament to its use in that setting. There are no specific school setting items, so I think we've had some questions about how does it differ from the school function assessment. So there are no specific school items like that, but it does have items on there around computer use and all those sort of practical aspects to being in a school environment as well. So it is definitely used within a school setting. So let me have a look at another one. So is the manual available in hard copy format? No, it's just available as a digital download within Q Global. What else? How is can the PEDICAT be used as a measure of adaptive behaviour in lieu of other adaptive behaviour measures? And yes, it is. It is an adaptive behaviour assessment, but it has got differences to other adaptive behaviour measures. It has that specific autism scale that's been tailored to meet the needs of that population. And it has a lot more mobility items, and those items around different mobility devices as well certainly sort of make its application, it has got some differences in its application to other adaptive behaviour type tools. What else? Did we say there are standard scores or age equivalents or both? There are standard scores, there are standardized scores, but I think Chris said there are the scaled scores in there, which are really good for monitoring change over time. And I think one of the things I can't remember if I mentioned or not, even though it's normed for individuals up to 20 years, 11 months, it can be used outside of that age range. So if you have individuals going into their 20s and you want to continue monitoring them, you can do using the scaled score. You obviously can't use the normative scores outside age range, but the scaled score you can continue to use out of age, and it will continue to provide useful information. Anything else? I've got 1 minute left. If I can get another couple of others in there. Is there a way to see all the items? If you have a Q Global account and you can get access to the manual in Q Global, you can actually see all the items in the manual. So if you want to see every single item, you can see it in the manual as well. And then another one, does the report just give scores, or does it give all the responses of the caregiver? And I think Chris covered that. It does actually provide the responses, so you can use that for intervention planning. And that FIT score that Chris mentioned, I know we're pretty much out of time, but I'm just going to go back to this quickly because I think it will help answer this question. If I can go back to the slide. So the FIT score is kind of a goodness of fit. So it looks at how close the responses are to how you would expect them to be. Have they got an unusual pattern? Have they got a pattern of responses that you would expect to see? And you can see on this slide where the the endorsed responses are those in red, and you can see sort of the outlying responses to help you identify where there might be particular areas of need or particular strengths, and you can use that to help with intervention planning. So, I think there's been a few questions around sort of using that to help target intervention and support intervention. So I'm conscious that we are pretty much out of time, and we've had a tremendous amount of questions, I think 130 questions. So we will get back to people with answers to your questions. I know we've not answered everybody's. I've tried to select the ones there that were most frequently asked. So I do thank you all for listening in today. And this will be available as a recording on our website. So if you didn't get to listen to it all, or you want to pass it on to a colleague, then the recording will be made available on our website. So on that note, I would like to say thank you. And Chris, I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, thank you all for, just real quickly, thank you all for attending. I hope that you found it helpful, and some of the information that Shelley was talking about in answering the questions are also available in the manual. So if you want to get extra information about the FIT scores and things like that, it is available there.
Oh, that's a good point, Chris. Yeah, you can certainly get access to Q Global and get access to the manual and have a look. So thank you everybody for listening, and we've gone 2 minutes over. So thank you for staying on for that extra couple of minutes. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.